Welcome to StoryGrove, where we share screen-free stories for kids without noisy advertisements. We hope you enjoy. Chapter 1. The air smelled like pine and fresh dirt as the Johnson family van rolled to a stop at the edge of a thick forest. The sun hung low, casting golden beams through the tall trees, and the sound of birds echoed in the distance. It was the perfect weekend for a camping trip. "All right, everyone out," Mr. Johnson called, stepping out and stretching his arms wide. "Welcome to Pine Ridge Campsite." 12-year-old Kristen, 10-year-old Ben, and 7-year-old Molly scrambled out of the van, their faces lighting up as they took in the view. Kristen adjusted her ponytail, her eyes scanning the towering pines and sparkling river that wound its way nearby. She was the responsible one, always making sure everyone had sunscreen and enough snacks. Ben immediately grabbed his walking stick, already pointing at a trail he wanted to explore. "Look at that path! I bet it leads to the river." Molly hugged her stuffed bunny, Mr. Fluff, close while spinning around in a circle. "I want to roast marshmallows first." Mrs. Johnson chuckled as she unloaded the cooler. "Let's get the tent set up first, marshmallows later." The campsite was tucked neatly between the forest and a gently flowing river. The water sparkled in the afternoon light, and small fish occasionally darted beneath the surface. Birds fluttered overhead, and a breeze rustled through the leaves. As the Johnsons pitched their tents and unrolled sleeping bags, the kids buzzed with excitement. They had a checklist of camping goals: catch fireflies, tell spooky stories, hike to the overlook, and of course make the ultimate s'mores. Once everything was in place, Mr. Johnson declared, "We've got a few hours before dinner. Who's up for a hike to check out the river?" "Me!" Ben shouted, already racing ahead with Kristen and Molly close behind. The family strolled along a well-worn trail that curved alongside the riverbank. The water flowed steadily, glinting in the sunlight. Ben poked at rocks with his stick, and Kristen pointed out animal tracks in the mud. Suddenly, Molly froze. "Look," she whispered, pointing across the river. Everyone stopped and peered through the trees. There, on the far bank, stood a scruffy brown and white dog, its ears perked up, and it stared at them with wide, curious eyes. It had no collar, and its fur looked tangled and wet. "Is that a stray?" Kristen asked, narrowing her eyes. "Poor thing," Mrs. Johnson murmured. "Must have wandered away from someone's campsite." Ben waved at the dog. "Hey, buddy, come here." The dog cocked its head but didn't move. It stood stock still as if unsure whether to trust them. Mr. Johnson shook his head. "River's too wide right here. Let's head back to camp. Maybe it'll wander over later." The family made their way back, but Kristen kept glancing over her shoulder, watching as the dog slowly disappeared into the shadows of the trees. That evening, they gathered around the crackling campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling silly stories. But even as the stars twinkled overhead and the night air cooled, Kristen couldn't shake the image of the lonely dog by the river. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves, and far off in the distance, a low rumble of thunder echoed. Mr. Johnson stood up, brushing off his hands. "Looks like a storm might be blowing in tonight. Better double-check the tent stakes." As they zipped themselves into their tents later, rain began pattering gently on the canvas, growing heavier by the minute. Kristen lay awake, listening to the sound of the storm. Her mind kept returning to the scruffy dog, wondering where it had gone and if it had found shelter. Morning dawned grey and misty, puddles scattered across the forest floor. The river, usually calm and peaceful, now rushed past, swollen and churning from the night's rain. Ben squinted at the water. "Whoa, it's way faster than yesterday." Molly gasped, pointing downstream. "Look!" They followed her gaze, and there, stranded on a small patch of muddy ground in the middle of the river, was the same scruffy dog. It was shivering, its paws barely above the swirling water. Kristen's stomach tightened. It must have gotten stuck during the storm. The current was strong, the water swirling dangerously around rocks and tree branches. Ben's eyes widened. "How are we gonna get it out?" The three siblings stood on the bank, the roar of the river loud in their ears, and knew one thing for sure. They had to rescue that dog. Chapter 2. The river roared louder than before, its swirling currents frothing with bits of foam and broken branches. Kristen, Ben and Molly stood at the edge of the bank, eyes locked on the stranded dog. It shivered, its paws planted on a small shrinking patch of muddy ground, water rushing all around. "Poor thing," Kristen murmured, already scanning the bank for any way across. Mr. Johnson appeared behind them, frowning at the sight. "That river's too dangerous for anyone to cross right now. We'll have to wait until the current slows." "But what if the dog gets swept away before then?" Molly whispered, her voice trembling. Kristen glanced down at her younger sister, then at Ben. She could see they were both thinking the same thing. Waiting wasn't an option. As their parents went back to check on breakfast, Kristen pulled her siblings into a quiet huddle. "All right, we need a plan," she said firmly. "We're not going to just stand here and do nothing." Ben's eyes lit up. "What if we tie a rope to a big stick and float it over to the dog? He could grab it." Kristen tilted her head thoughtfully. "It's worth a try." They rummaged through their camping supplies, eventually finding a length of sturdy rope and one of Ben's longer walking sticks. Ben tied the rope tightly around the stick, while Kristen secured the other end around a nearby tree. With careful aim, Ben hurled the stick into the water, but the rushing current snatched it up immediately, dragging it downstream far out of reach of the stranded dog. "Well," Ben sighed, retrieving the soggy rope. "That didn't work." Molly chewed her lip. "What if we made a bridge? Like with logs and stuff?" Ben nodded eagerly. "We could find some big branches." The three of them raced through the trees, gathering fallen branches and logs. They lugged them to the river's edge and began arranging them across the narrowest part of the riverbank. It didn't take long to realize, though, that even the biggest logs wobbled dangerously in the water, slipping out of place the moment they tried to step on them. Kristen shook her head. "The current's too strong. It'll wash everything away before we can get across." Molly wiped her eyes, her gaze fixed on the dog. "We have to do something else. Something safer." Ben stared at the river, eyes narrowing. "Hey, look at those big rocks over there." He pointed upstream to where several large flat stones jutted above the water's surface. Kristen squinted. "You think we could hop across them?" Ben shrugged. "Maybe, if we're careful." The three siblings carefully made their way upstream, testing the rocks. The water rushed between them, but the stones themselves were slick and mossy. Kristen reached the third rock before realizing her foot had nearly slipped twice. She looked back at Molly, who was hesitating on the shore. "This is too risky," Kristen called, carefully stepping back to solid ground. "One wrong move and we're in the river." Ben nodded, clearly disappointed. They trudged back to the bank where the dog still waited, its eyes wide and frightened. Molly crouched low, calling softly. "It's okay, puppy, we're trying." Kristen paced back and forth, mind racing. They'd tried floating a rope, building a bridge, and hopping rocks, all failures. The river's current wasn't letting up, and time was running out. "Maybe we need something that can float and stay steady," Ben murmured. Kristen's eyes lit up. "Like a raft." Chapter 3. They scoured the campsite, gathering all sorts of supplies. Sticks, logs, extra rope, even the large plastic lid from the cooler. Working together, they lashed the sticks together tightly, forming a crude but stable raft. They tied a long rope securely to the front. Mr. Johnson noticed their construction and wandered over, raising an eyebrow. "What are you kids up to?" Kristen took a deep breath. "We're building a raft to rescue the dog." Mr. Johnson looked from the raft to the river and back. After a pause, he gave a small nod. "That's actually pretty clever. Let me help you secure it better." With his help, they tightened the ropes and added a few extra branches for stability. When the raft was ready, they carried it carefully to the riverbank. Ben grinned. "Okay, here goes nothing." They pushed the raft into the water, letting it float toward the island while Kristen held tight to the rope. The current tugged fiercely, but they worked together, easing the raft closer to where the dog stood. The dog barked nervously, pacing on the muddy patch. "Come on, buddy," Kristen coaxed. "You can do it." But just as the raft drifted within reach, a sudden surge in the current yanked it sideways, spinning it out of control. The rope snapped taut, and the raft flipped, pieces breaking apart and floating downstream. Molly gasped, "No!" The siblings pulled the broken pieces back to shore, shoulders slumping. Kristen's hands trembled as she stared at the stranded dog. "We're running out of ideas." Ben kicked a pebble, frustration written all over his face. But then, out of the corner of her eye, Kristen noticed something. Farther upstream, a massive tree had fallen across part of the river, its trunk partially wedged between rocks. A large branch hung low, creating a narrow, natural bridge. Kristen's mind raced. "Maybe," she murmured. "Just maybe." She turned to her siblings, hope flickering in her chest. "Come on. I've got one more idea." Chapter 4. Kristen stood at the riverbank, eyes locked on the massive tree trunk wedged upstream. The water rushed beneath it, but the trunk itself looked solid, with thick branches jutting outward, some dipping low over the current. It wasn't a perfect bridge, but it gave her an idea. She glanced at Ben and Molly. "See that fallen tree? What if we use it to slow down the river? We could drop logs, branches, anything we can find upstream, and pile them against the trunk. Maybe we can divert the water enough so the flow around the dog's island gets weaker." Ben's eyes widened. "Like a dam!" Kristen nodded. "Exactly, a diversion dam. If we can get the current to move more to one side, the dog might have a chance to jump safely to shore." Molly squeezed Mr. Fluff tightly. "But we'll need a lot of debris." Back at the campsite, they grabbed ropes, long sticks, and broken branches scattered throughout the woods. Their parents, noticing the determination in their faces, helped gather bigger logs. Once they had a sizable pile, they worked together, dragging the debris upstream to the fallen tree. With careful teamwork, they began dropping logs and branches into the water, watching as the current pushed them against the massive trunk. Some smaller sticks floated away, but soon larger branches wedged tightly between the rocks and tree limbs. Ben tossed in a hefty log, and it lodged perfectly against the trunk, causing the water to surge higher on one side while calming slightly on the other. Little by little, they saw the effect. The river's strongest flow shifted away from the island where the dog stood. Kristen kept a close eye on the dog, which now perked up, noticing the calmer waters lapping at the edge of the island. "Almost there," she whispered. Ben hurled one final log, and it fit snugly, completing the makeshift dam. The water around the dog's patch swirled gently now, no longer threatening. "Come on, buddy," Molly called softly. The dog hesitated, sniffing the air. Then, with one brave leap, it bounded across the shallow stretch of water to the riverbank, landing safely on the pebbled shore. Kristen rushed forward, crouching low as the dog padded over, tail wagging uncertainly. "We got you," she murmured, reaching out a hand. Once back at camp, the dog curled up by the fire, exhausted but safe. Mrs. Johnson dried it off with an old towel, while Mr. Johnson offered fresh water and leftover food. "I think we've got ourselves a new camper," Mr. Johnson joked, ruffling the dog's ears. That evening, as the family sat around the campfire, Molly finally asked the question they'd all been thinking. "Can we keep him?" Mr. Johnson smiled at Mrs. Johnson, who nodded. "Well," he said, "he doesn't seem to belong to anyone, and he sure seems to like you kids." Ben grinned. "Let's name him River." The newly named River wagged his tail, nestling close to Kristen. As stars blinked overhead and the sounds of the forest settled in for the night, Kristen smiled, knowing their camping trip had turned into an unforgettable adventure, and they'd gained a loyal new friend. Thanks for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it and feel calm and cozy. If you'd like more screen-free, ad-free, and wholesome stories, don't forget to follow our channel. Or hop on over to our YouTube channel for even more wholesome screen-free tales. See you next time.